Now, open your Bibles to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5. This is Lazarus part 2, what I started about a week ago. Before we get back to Lazarus, I want to read two different gospel stories. One we find here in Mark, and another one we find in Luke. Let's read the verses together, because we have two occasions here where Jesus brings people back from the dead. And this is important to know these two different occasions. Especially when we compare these particular situations and occasions of people dying and then coming back to life to Lazarus. Even though they're both been brought back from the dead, the Jews perceive them differently. And I'll tell you why here in about 20 minutes. But first, let's read the verses. Mark chapter 5, verse 21. And when Jesus was passed over again by ship unto the other side, much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea. And behold, there cometh out one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. He had a crowd. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood, and then I'm going to skip that because this happens on his way to go see this ruler's daughter. So let's pick it up in verse 35. Because I just want to stay on the story of the child being raised from the dead. While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou thy master any further? It's too late, Jesus. She died. As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. There, the word is pisteo. Only have trust and confidence in what I can do and what I say. I have the last word. And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter and James and John, the brother of James. He didn't want the word to get out. I think eventually it got out anyway, but that was the purpose behind that. And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he said unto them, Why make ye this ado, and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. You'll see that occasionally. Even though everyone knows she's dead, Jesus is saying sleepeth. You got to understand the Hebrew concept of death and the concept that Jesus applied to the word sleepeth. See, when you die, your body goes to sleep. Your body, your physical body is dead. But you're still living. Your soul moves on. Your soul is alive and well. To be dead in this body, the physical body, is to be alive and well in a soul and spirit sense with Christ. And everyone else that's made it to that destination, that put their trust and confidence in Jesus. So when Jesus says here, the damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. In other words, she's still alive. Yes, her physical body is not functioning anymore, but she's not dead as far as her soul and spirit goes. They're alive and well. And it's a hard thing to grasp your mind around. It's a hard thing to wrap your mind about death and what happens after this physical body dies. And they had the same problem. They were expecting a resurrection from the dead, the Hebrews, but in a different sense. It would come at the end of all things, where the Messiah would bring individuals back to life, both spiritually, spirit-wise, soul-wise, and with a body. Now in the New Testament we know it's a new body. It's a body somewhat probably like Jesus Christ, his resurrected body. Verse 40, and they laughed him to the scorn. Just previous verses, they were wailing and crying and weeping greatly. Now they're laughing him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, Jesus said, get out. Kind of a funny story if you think about it, the way it goes down here in the scriptures. Jesus said, get out. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, and entered in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, Damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with great astonishment. Now, obviously, Jesus, and I want you to make note of this, one of the reasons why I'm reading this story, the main reason, Jesus brings someone back to life the very same day, probably within hours, if not less, of this 12-year-old's death. You got it? What does it matter? Dead's dead. Oh, well, we're going to get to that. Now, go to Luke. Let's read another story. Luke chapter 7, verse 11. And it came to pass that after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people, had a big gathering again. Now when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out. So he's been probably dead a while. So they're just carrying him out. The only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said unto her, weep not. And he came and touched it bier, or coffin, and they that bare him stood still. And he said, Young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak. And he delivered him to his mother. And there came a fear on all, and they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen up among us, that God has visited his people. And this room of him went forth throughout all Judea and throughout all the regions round about. Now this is probably another situation when this person has not been dead more than a day. And he was put in a coffin and was being carried out to be buried or entombed. Once again, Jesus met up with people that recently died 24 hours or less before Jesus spoke to their bodies and say, arise. You got it? Now let's go to the Lazarus story again. John chapter 11. Now a certain man was sick, verse 1, named Lazarus, of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore her sister sent unto him, saying, Lord, Lord, he whom thou lovest is sick. Now the Greek word there for lovest is love as a dear friend. So what Mary was saying is, behold, he whom thou loves as a dear friend is sick. When Jesus heard that he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. Remember that the Son of God might be glorified. Remember that, thereby. Now Jesus loved, a different Greek word is used here than the way the sisters were describing Lazarus to Jesus. Jesus has more of a deeper love, a more affectionate love, a more committed love than just being a friend of Lazarus. And you read through the story, which I'm not going to do again tonight. Lazarus dies before Jesus was able to get there. But Jesus could have got there probably in time, because by the time Jesus got the news, he still waited 2 more days before he would decide to go and see Lazarus. And by the time he got there, Lazarus had already been dead 4 days. 4 days. Not 24 hours or less, but 4 days. Now, Jesus obviously, if you are a follower and disciple of Jesus Christ, can bring someone back to life. But no matter how many days. But in both of these stories that I read to you first, it was on the first day. Jesus was physically on site. He wasn't 2 days away. Now the Hebrews believed, or in their view of death, that when a person died, the first 3 days, their souls, and this is important to understand this, their souls would hover around their body. Even though their physical body is dead, the Hebrews believed that their souls, from the minute they die until the last minute of the 3rd day, their soul would hover around the body. And you're considered dead, even though the soul is hovering around the body. Now, on the fourth day, the body would stink so bad because of decomposition that's taken place, the decay process. It would stink so bad that the Hebrews believed by the fourth day, the soul then would flee from the body and go wherever it would go. So by the fourth day, you are not just considered dead. You are real dead. You were not just dead, but dead. You got it? Now, why is this important? And it's important to understand the significance between the first two stories I read to you and the Lazarus story. The rabbis had been teaching that when the Messiah arrived, he would be able to do something so amazing so that everyone would know that the prophesied one had arrived. That's what they were teaching people. Look for that amazing person that would do amazing things, wonderful miracles. And when they would arrive, you would know. Bringing someone back from the dead was just that. And the religious establishment knew that. They feared it. They didn't want their apple cart disturbed, turned upside down. Only the Messiah could bring back somebody from the dead. I know some ancient prophets did it also. But it was similar to what Jesus did to the first two stories I read to you. The religious establishment had a problem with this. They had also been teaching that when this Messiah would come, he would go to the temple and set up his throne and begin his reign. Now they were teaching this, but obviously they didn't believe it. And their problem was, the temple was their moneymaker. The temple was their cash cow, and a cash cow it was. It was the equivalent of New York's Wall Street of the day for the Jews. It was controlled and managed by the Sadducees and the Sanhedrin. Let's just put it this way, in simple terms. You would not want to piss them off. I'm not cussing. I'm just making it real for you so you can understand the context of how this story, how the story is going down and why it's taking place the way it's described to us here in the scriptures. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing by waiting to come back and deal with the Lazarus situation. Now, if Jesus was the Messiah, the religious establishment scam would be over. They would be out of work. Plain and simple. Out of work. If Jesus was the Messiah, they would lose their power. They didn't want to lose their power. And more than likely, their position and wealth. So their solution was to kill him. Kill Jesus. Eliminate him. So they keep the cash cow going, keep their moneymaker going, keep their fame, keep their wealth, keep their positions, keep their thumbs over people's lives, pressing in on them with all their self-righteousness. You got it? Now, this same religious establishment, now with the background of the first two stories and now the Lazarus story, they can make the claim that bringing someone back from the dead on the first day wouldn't count. What do you mean by that? Their soul was still lingering around the body. This is what they believe. And it's too bad. Most preachers and teachers don't teach the history behind and the belief systems and the way they looked upon, in this case, death when it happened. And I repeat, the first 3 days, the body is dead, you're considered dead, but the soul's still lingering around according to their view. And it's not till the fourth day, when the body is in such a decomposed state that it stinks so bad that the soul makes a mad dash out of there and goes wherever it goes. So their reasoning and excuse, the person was only in a coma. Or the person might have been dead according to someone else's viewpoint because there was no response from that person, or the vital signs such as breathing wasn't happening because they were in such a deep state of coma, it could hardly be detected that they were alive. So they're considered dead. They also concluded that the soul had left the area around the body. So what Jesus did in those first two stories didn't count. And unless you know how they understood death and what they taught and practiced, you'll miss the significance of why Jesus waited 4 days. The religious leaders used the 3-day rule. Let's just call it that. They used the 3-day rule to discredit Jesus. And if they can do that, then Jesus could not be the Messiah everyone was waiting for. He just couldn't be. Well, when you read the Lazarus story, that argument was put to rest, period. Jesus intentionally delayed his arrival. It was a deliberate delay by Jesus. A fourth-day resurrection would leave no doubts about Jesus being the Messiah, and Jesus knew that. Now, because Lazarus was brought back from, let's just call it the dead, the really dead, fourth-day dead, Lazarus, if you read the story and know the history, had to run for their lives. Just imagine if you were at Exhibit A that proves that Jesus was the Messiah. the Sanhedrin, the Sadducees, would have a bounty out for you and want you dead also. Now, they didn't come back, and they fled to the parts of Ephraim to a city of refuge until the last week of Jesus' life. You got it? The religious leaders had no more argument that Jesus wasn't the Messiah. They just didn't have one. So they concluded that Jesus had to die. In a sense, when you think about everything that I've said from part 1 and part 2 this evening of this Lazarus story, the raising of Lazarus sealed the deal for Jesus, proving that he was the Messiah, and also it definitely led to his death, because there's no way, especially with Jesus coming to Jerusalem, that the religious establishment, in fear of Jesus taking over now, ruling and reigning from the temple, and destroying all they had worked to accomplish in the flesh. They didn't want no part of that, and the only solution was kill Jesus. Now, go back to Hebrews 11. Not Hebrews 11. John 11, verse 4. When Jesus heard that, he said, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby." Lazarus, whom Jesus loved dearly, was chosen to glorify Jesus. Now, Lazarus, if you think about it, paid the ultimate price that proved that Jesus was Messiah. To the people that lived in that day, that knew and understood what I told you tonight about the 3-day rule. He paid the ultimate price to prove Jesus was the Messiah. I almost feel embarrassed and ashamed sometimes when I complain to Jesus about my woes in life, not recognizing what I'm going through, because I'm being tried in the fire, will bring glory to Jesus. We'll glorify Him, that He might be glorified. If you really think about it, it's a new way of looking at your problems, your trials, your tribulations. Lazarus had to pay the ultimate price. And he came back to life again and then had to die again. What I'm trying to say tonight, what I've been trying to communicate for years, is that our existence in this world is all about God's glory. It is very little about our convenience. If we are centered in God's will, like in this story, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, it proves to me life is not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy, folks. I feel right now, if I had a congregation in front of me, I probably would lose half of you because of this last statement. It's just not something that you want to hear when you hear a sermon, when you hear somebody preaching to you. You want a preacher to preach to you that how your life is going to become easier. Let me say it in a different way. What God achieves through us is all about His glory. Most of the time, it is not about our convenience. Jesus had it all under control. He knew what He had to do. And He gave one more opportunity before His death and resurrection, because it also, Lazarus, and like I said in the first part of this teaching, it foreshadowed what Christ would eventually go through very shortly after Lazarus' death and being rose from the grave, or being risen from the grave by Jesus saying, "Come out." Jesus gave another opportunity. And you think His apostles, or then disciples, and everyone else that were followers of Jesus Christ, including the two that were on the road to Emmaus, remember that teaching? Would remember what they saw. I don't know about you, but it's not an everyday event you see someone come back to life after 4 days being dead. Jesus gave, and He's always, in His compassion, looking for anything and everything, not to tear down our faith, but to build it. But to build it. Lazarus, like I said, it was chosen. Joe was chosen. Put your name on it. To glorify Jesus. I don't know what price I have to pay in the future. I don't know what price you might have to pay in the future. But it's all to prove and to glorify that Jesus is King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the Creator of the universe, the Almighty. And nothing happens unless He allows it. Let us learn from this story in our future. And I'm sure I'll forget it, but hopefully I'll remember it sooner than later. That when those problems and trials and tribulations and tough circumstances and deep, long, dark valleys are present, God is there with us. He'll never leave us nor forsake us. We will be tried in the fire. But while we're being tried in the fire, He will give us the necessary strength to bring us through, to carry us through, and we'll come out on the other side in victory. Not just glorifying Him after the fact. Let's remember to glorify Him smack right in the middle of whatever we're going through. The last thing Satan and his evil minions want to hear is us glorifying the name of the Lord and trusting, having confidence no matter what we go through. He has our best interests interest on his mind. And he is not a man to fail. He's already won the victory over death. And if he can win the victory over death, everything else, even though it doesn't feel like it at the time when you're going through it, it's much easier for him to handle whatever it is we're going through, because he's already did the big one, conquering death. Now this physical body will die someday if he doesn't come back sooner. I don't believe my soul hangs around for 3 days. To be absent in the body is to be present with the Lord. I don't think there's a 3-day waiting period. It's not like a lemon law. When you buy a house, you have to wait 3 days before it's officially considered as a done deal. I believe we go on to be present with the Lord. As soon as that happens, we no longer have to be in this miserable existence, but now present with the Lord. But no matter how it goes down, until then, let's make sure that we keep glorifying his name through it all. Not just in the good times, but also in the bad times. Not just when we're celebrating in victory, but when we're going through the trial and tribulation, the valley. Let's remember who our Lord and Creator is and who controls all things. He controls everything. He allows things to happen to us, but it's for a purpose. Besides whatever purpose he has for us in an individual spiritual growth situation that we can identify with, but it also happens that we could glorify him in an individual basis, but also so others can see who has our back, who's with us, who's for us. And the ones that are against us, God help them. Because you're not against me. You're against my Savior. And he's looking out for me. And he's looking out for you. You got it? If you do, play a song. I want to hear from you.